Welcome to Money on Tap. Money on Tap, your personal finance headquarters, where we bring out the professionals' experience and some fun in what we call three-dimensional investing, utilizing insurance, brokerage, and fee-based planning. That's what we do on this show. We look at all sides of the issues, and we bring a fully independent planning perspective to the table.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. So glad to have you aboard today with us. We are going to be talking about rolling the dice on your pension. It's a big world out there, and that P word, that pension word. And there's a lot of interesting news for us to cover in this topic. But before we get going that direction, Ben, Dan, how are you guys today?
I'm doing good.
Yeah, excited about the show. It's it's a little bit scary, but I think there's a lot of good information that everybody who is a participant in a pension needs to hear, specifically municipal ones. But regardless of what you hear today and what you go find, and hopefully we can encourage you to look into that program for yourselves. There are options and there are ways to buoy that.
And I think that this show specifically doesn't necessarily, like if you don't have a pension and you're listening, like this isn't like turn the dial off, because there's going to be a lot of information that, from the solution standpoint of how you build, sustainable retirement income is really going to be relevant to our conversation. So,
well, whether you have a pension or not, you're paying for it regardless when we get into how these things are funded or unfunded. But understanding that, it affects us all, payers and recipients, or just payers. It has an effect across the board.
It does.
You're right. It's going to be a really fascinating dive into a significant part of the local economy, as well as the setup of the landscape for retirement today. But before we get going too far down that road, it is time for Money in the News.
We got here first up, this is an article from Adita Gangley from Bonzinga. It's a look at the startups Jeff Bezos has invested in this year. Most have this one thing in common, and I found this interesting in particular because we all think of Bezos as having made his money from Amazon, and that certainly is where the bulk of it comes from. But over the years, he's also been a pretty savvy investor in different startups. He was an investor in Google back in 1998, and he put $250,000 in at that point in time, which is worth $3.1 billion today. So he did pretty well on that return, but it's just a piece of his, $150 billion net worth overall. So, but it's interesting to see what he does with his money. We talked about one of his investments last week. It was the real estate company there, and different ways to participate with fractional shares of homes,
arrived homes,
exactly. So. Which was an interesting take, not something we necessarily advised or advocated for. In fact, Ben said, run for the hills, don't even think about it. It's just interesting to see. And the list that this is just the companies he's invested in here in 2022. So, he's been doing this since 98, so he's got a long track record and many companies invested in. But it kind of covers the whole gamut of what's out there, and that I found to be the interesting part here. He invested in Overtime Sports, which is a company that distributes sports media and digital sports reporting through different social media platforms. Real World, which is a New York-based startup that aims to simplify adulthood, which is kind of interesting in its own right, but it helps.
I haven't seen anything simple about adulthood yet in my life.
I'm interested in seeing what really is. Maybe there's something we can all learn there. That should probably be a theme for another show. But Arrived Homes, we just talked about. Stark Bank, which is kind of a fintech company down in Brazil. Outgo, which is a freight tracking company, which you can see, these days with all of our supply chain issues, probably a lot of interest in something like that. Doxo, which is an all-in-one app designed for online bill payment, which, again, is something that might be a useful utility for a lot of different people. Wild Type, which is growing cell-cultured salmon. We talked about that in a show way back about kind of grown meat in a lab.
Yeah, that's disgusting. The cloud paper that's next, Dan, I find tremendously painful. It's a startup designs toilet paper and paper towels from bamboo.
Yes.
All I think about is bamboo is splintering.
Yes. Probably some places you don't want.
Sounds painful. Might have been a bad investment.
No, yeah, that's certainly one I don't want to experience. I'll tell you that.
I think when I'm looking at all of this stuff, it's amazing to me. It's like Bezos has plenty of money, and it doesn't matter how much money you have; you just keep investing. But I think it's really interesting from a money in the news perspective is that, I mean, he has the ability to gamble on stuff that would mean nothing. That any one of these could turn out to be 20-fold, and so out of his 10 investments, he's still doubled his money theoretically. So, the average investor doesn't get opportunities like this stuff. So it's kind of interesting that way. But I think when I look at money in the news and what he's doing, I really look for like synergies along with what he thinks has value or what his advisors think have value in that space. Like I look at Stark Bank, looking for fintech startups. Like fintech is literally staring us in the face. It's going to explode. I mean, I don't know if it's 5 years from now or 50 years from now, but it's going to be a major portion of our world. And him looking for a startup experience is really interesting. And I think about that woman that runs the ARC funds, Catherine Wood. I think she's just a little early.
Right.
I think she's just a little early, and I think that there's a lot of real value there. And so I think we bring these articles to everybody, and it's like, oh, what do we care about this stuff? But you have to know what the wealthy are doing and where they're putting their money because they have some of the best advisors out there.
And that's the commonality that this article points out is that, what he's specifically doing, at least in their interpretation of the moves he's made, is that he's targeting Generation Z, right? So he's got a specific target audience who he thinks will find use and utility in these startups. And because of that, he's investing in them. He thinks, for whatever reason, whatever the driver is that there's this ongoing wealth transfer, and these are going to be the people who inherit the world and have the money to spend. So he's putting his wallet behind companies that are going to be attractive to that group.
Yeah, great article. I had a lot of fun actually reading through it. And one of the things that adds so much value, I think, here is when you take a look at Bezos, he comes from the private equity world, right? He comes from that investment world, but then he also was a startup guy. He did that with Amazon, the story out of the garage, and mom and dad's money. And that's how it started, this story. I did not know that he was an original investor in Google. And one of the fun things to look through here was, again, that real world. I actually spent some time looking through that because I thought that was an interesting idea of younger generation maturing and really needing a playbook. And there was some 90-some different playbooks that they had there, depending on, finances around different solutions or, starting a family. All these different playbooks that they were bringing to the table. Next up, guess what, folks? We're back into this real estate question here, which is, are you in, are you out? Well, I'm an aggressive buyer of income real estate, billionaire says, anticipating a lot of inventory this year. Article by Mark Gilman. Thank you very much, Yahoo Finance, and bringing this to the table. As I read through here, the question of, how to invest in real estate was really addressed because, coming through such a huge rise in the residential real estate world, people were wondering, is there still an opportunity here?
Yeah, no, I really think it's interesting. To add to this article, I think it's, home loan rates have doubled in 9 months. That's just never happened before. It's just astronomical how fast things are moving. And to kind of think about, real estate in general and managing the rates and the complexity of it. And, we talked about REITs last week and, the real estate investment trust space, because it's a wonderful income play. And you really got to know what you really have to understand the underlying rate associations that you have in a lot of real estate programs, because some are just floating rates. Like they might have bank loans for hundreds of millions of dollars that just move with whatever the rate is each month or each day based on whatever LIBOR or whatever, program that they're basing their rate, foundation off of. So I think it's really important that you understand that underlying principle of how it is. Some companies have 5-year fixed, and they're still enjoying that. So there's still going to be some really strong revenue, but what's a reset going to look like and how is that going to impact your income? That's one thing is I am very positive on real estate because I think that's really where there's a lot of opportunity for people to really build income personally. But you really got to make sure, buyer beware, where you're actually allocating those dollars to make sure you're not buying something that's going to be underwater.
Yeah, and the interview here is with a gentleman named Cardone, who was he was undercover billionaire on Discovery Network. And, he's really specifically lays out a couple things that he's targeting here. Specifically talks about REITs kind of in the non-residential sector because he thinks that they remain undervalued and will produce steady income. But he also talks about, homeowners in the residential space that own more than 1,000 properties, right? So this is a very specific kind of segment out there. And he talks about Redfin and OfferPad Solutions, and Zillow tried to get there, but their program kind of fell flat. When they were, if you recall that, they were offering to buy sight unseen anybody out there essentially, and that just really didn't pan out for them. But what he's seen as a trend here is there's two things he's looking for is, of these companies that own 1,000 or more units, they've been buying up the last 2 years 3% of the available homes. And his rationale, or what his underlying thought there is that they're going to scoop these up to rent them, because as mortgage rates rise, the community of available buyers who truly can afford to buy is going to shrink, and therefore they're going to be forced to rent. And so he wants to, he's targeting companies that will have they'll have all of the surplus inventory to be able to rent it.
Right.
And the other thing he's looking for is, for people out there who have, bought into kind of flip projects, at taking on the ARM, the variable rate, thinking they'd have a quick move and have rates spike behind them, they're going to find themselves underwater in their own little flip scheme, and they're going to need an easy, quick exit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next up, we have inflation rose faster than expected in August, keeping prices painfully high. Fox Business by Megan Haney brings us this article that really is, frankly, I laugh because I'm like, we know.
I'm looking forward to a week without this story. That would be nice.
I know.
Well, I mean, it's just if Fed just raised rates another 0.75 of a point, they're getting aggressive, and they're saying they're not going to stop until it's mitigated. I mean, that's kind of a scary statement. I mean, that's like saying, hey, recession's in the foreground in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, we're counting on them, unfortunately, to resolve a problem that they didn't understand was coming. That's a scary combination there.
I think the scary side of that is that they're supposed to be forecasting, and this caught them by surprise. I was like, not really sure I count on their forecasting moving forward.
I'm not sure I believe that caught them by surprise, because I don't know who out there was looking at the way money was going and getting printed and wasn't saying, well, this is the way that
there's like 10 speeches. There's 10 speeches of either between Biden and Powell long before, a year before, saying that we're not going to be having the inflationary thing. It's not going to be out of control, and they all knew it was.
Yeah, I mean, you almost hope that it's true, that they were lying to us. Maybe that means they have a handle on the fix.
You're right.
But the fact of the matter is, I mean, we heard that word, a miserable word, transitory, right? I mean, so many times.
Oh gosh.
And it's proven to be anything but.
Yeah,
and that's for sure.
The problem, the problem with this is there's just so, it's such art. It's like art. It's somewhat artificial inflation. Right. I think that's why they were, pushing for transitory in their wording and so forth. And maybe they were hopeful that it was just going to dissipate. But if you shut down the world for 2 years, you don't think you're going to have, this artificial, massive demand that can't be fulfilled, that's just going to be pent up, ready to go, and it's going to force everything to go sky high? I mean,
throw on top of that the trillions of dollars they just kind of threw into the market that, some went to use, some sat in bank accounts. I mean,
you need 10 trillion.
Yeah. I mean, who knows, because it continues to go, right?
Right, and people have the money to spend on top of the inflation, so therefore it continues to inflate.
Yeah, I mean, everything's at auction at this point, to the highest bidder. Forget about what's marked, and that seems to be the way.
When you go to McDonald's and it's the $5 menu and not the dollar menu.
Not transitory. Yeah, I just, I remember pre-Biden there was, Fed's, wanting to raise rates, conversations around, blips in the radar happening in our stock market at that time. And the economy really doing so well that my thought at that time was it just doesn't make sense for them not to start while the economy is, has clearly recovered and is doing incredibly well, to start doing some of this activity. And then we, roll into, COVID. It's like, well, hands are tied, folks. Nothing we can do except for start printing money here. So we'll see what happens. This is going to be interesting. I don't know what to tell you, but we'll come up with a name for it. Transitory. That's what we'll do.
Yeah. The one thing that came out of the article that seems like it might be good news is, although things continue to be rampant and increasing, the rate at which it's increased is kind of flattened out a little bit. So I don't know if that means we've grabbed a toehold in this thing or what.
It's not like you're climbing Mount Everest and you're scaling the last few feet of the peak. It sounds like we're on the last couple steps to the top. That's what it does sound like. I would agree with that. But
Dan, you are a ray of sunshine here today. I appreciate that. Folks, you're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. You know what? I think we're going to come back here in a couple of minutes. I'm pretty sure that's the plan. And today we are going to be talking about rolling the dice on your pension. Can't wait to get into this topic with you. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. You're listening to Money on Tap.
Do you have an annuity? Do you understand exactly how it works and when to use it? The likelihood is that you don't, or maybe you bought it a while ago because at the time it sounded like a good idea. But will it accomplish your goals? We are here to help you. Contact us about a free annuity review and learn what your annuity does, how it works, and how it can best help you with your retirement goals. It's absolutely free to you, and if there's a better way for you to accomplish your goals, this is a great way for you to learn about those opportunities too. Take the time to get educated, get empowered, make your retirement a success. Call us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com.
You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. And now, more Money on Tap with Ben, Seth, and Dan.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. And today we are talking about rolling the dice on your pension. And there's not everybody has a pension, and we realize that, but there's still a good chunk of the market or the retirees out there that have access to these and are relying or in some part depending on their retirement to be provided through a pension. And if you're unfamiliar with what that is, we'll get into a little bit around that. But right now we're going to actually start talking more about specifically the state of New Hampshire and there's an interesting story developing in New Hampshire, and it's been developing for a while. Why don't you go ahead and take it away, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, what kind of got us going down this road is, and we've talked about pensions many times over, and we got a kind of series of shows around no pension, no problem. So, if this one piques your interest, definitely go back to the library and grab those as well, because we do have some solutions as how you can personally take control when opportunities present themselves of your own pension, and there's some strategies around that. But what caught my eyes in the Wall Street Journal, they had an article about city and state pension funds suffering their worst year since 2009, which, you can understand with kind of market conditions, why that may be the case. But it was kind of eye-opening for me to see is exactly, again, looking at the country across the board, what these pensions are invested in and, how they've fared lately. And, from June 30th to June 30th, public pensions have lost a median of 7.9%. across the board, which, is maybe faring better than some of our individual portfolios. But when you understand the importance of a pension system and how many lives it's intended to support, I mean, that's a considerable loss. What comes further from this is, each pension system runs on its own, but, on average, the way they figure it, that these pensions expect to earn about 7% a year. And in order to get there, they've had to take on, considerably more and more risk over time. And presently, the kind of your average portfolio composition is about 60% in equities, 24% in bonds, 9% in alternative investments, about 1.5% in cash, and 0.5% in real estate. So that's, when you have 60% of the pension system invested in equities, and we're going through kind of the volatile times we're experiencing right now, that's a hefty portion. That's a lot of money to be kind of left to the whims of the market.
Yeah, I think the thing about pensions, and the thing that makes it really scary, because if you have a pension, there's we're going to talk about a lot of things that might just throw a lot of fear at you, and I don't want that to be the case. But the way pensions work and what people do with pensions and the third-party administrators that manage these things is that they come up with a projection of what your rate of return is going to be, and the 7% you're talking about is pretty normal. The problem is that you as a consumer, or a person, or a pensionee, what you're actually looking at is you're saying to yourself, okay, well, I'm going to get this benefit when I retire, and this organization is going to be responsible for it. And the problem with that is that the organization has some control. The TPA has the control to say, we did at one point in time think it was going to make 7%. And so any shortfall the organization has to come up with. So if they only make 4% and they were going to make 7%, well, they got a 3% expense brand new already on their books. And this was a reason why a lot of corporations have gotten out of pensions, because it was just kind of an unknown liability each and every year of how much are we going to have to overfund the pension when we have a huge drop. So a lot of TPAs, they get, kind of strong-armed a little bit, and then they say, okay, well, we thought it was going to be 7, but we're going to lower it to 5 so that the corporation or organization can underfund what they were going to have to come up with because we were mistaken, and we're going to push these numbers out farther. That is a major, major problem because you don't really know what's going on in the background. Most of the legitimate pensions do keep their numbers square, and they try to do that, but then they start taking on more and more debt, and that's really what a lot of the problem lies in. One of the things that I thought was interesting is last year pensions did 27%. I mean, it was just crazy, great numbers and so forth. But when you look at the returns across the board, I mean, there was like a lot of years where the market was good that it was barely performing above zero. Because some of their allocations are just so strong. I mean, when you're looking at the average pension system being about 25% in bonds, and bonds have been, we have talked on this show 1,000 times over, literally an anchor dragging behind a boat that you're trying to move forward. It's extremely difficult. Now, as the rates get a little higher, as we're talking, the Fed just raised rates again, 0.75 of a point. That's going to make bonds a little bit more and more attractive as time goes on. And so that's interesting. And I think you'll probably see even more bond holdings in portfolios as rates get higher.
Yeah, I saw the news this morning that the 2-year bond was approaching 4%. I think it went over 4%. I don't know exactly where it stands at the moment, but you're halfway there, right?
Yeah.
If that's the way you're allocated. So if you're in a pension system or you're a pension manager, you better get in those, because then you can cut down your equity exposure significantly if the bond portfolio is going to get you halfway to the return you're looking for. So I think there's room for optimism in there, but specifically when we get back to New Hampshire now, we've been kind of talking about the national averages. New Hampshire is in a little bit of a difficult spot because they expect to return about the same. They're targeting. They were initially at 7%, and I think scaled it back down to 6.25%.
6.75%, which is what I was talking about. Yeah. They kind of readjust their numbers to try to make the debt appear smaller.
Yeah, and they've and unfortunately their earning expectation is 6.25%, but they're financing the shortfall at 6.75%, which is literally the most expensive loan the state has.
Yeah, the thing is like they can dial these returns up, and I was just to be clear, you dial your returns up, and you say, hey, we're going to make this much, we have to put less in to get there. You dial your returns back, and you have to put more money in. So there's kind of like this back and forth. Mitigating that is huge. The problem with New Hampshire specifically is the fact that basically the state started this program, as we were talking earlier, 40%, they were funding 40%, and Then they dropped it down to 35%, and then by 2011 they were doing zero.
Yeah, and in 1967, when this fund was established, that was the agreement, right? The state would cover 40%, the municipalities cover the other 60%. But yet, to your point, 2009 they cut it back to 35%. 2011 comes along, they go to zero.
Yeah.
So they put it entirely on the municipalities to fund this program. And there's been legislation out there lately to get the state participating again. Because I think last year there was a $252 million surplus in the budget. So you think they'd potentially throw some of that at the problem. But politically, that doesn't get anybody elected. So that's not happening.
Yeah, that is like one of the keys there, Dan, that I think, if you were to just take a look at it from a budget and how do you manage a budget, it's like, well, you have a surplus and you have a debt. And, of course, you want to pay off the debt. Some of the numbers that you've talked about is the target of 7% as far as a return on the total portfolio. But then you have this debt over here that you have lend out at 6.75%. And so on those monies lent, and if you are hitting a target of 7%, you're really only up a quarter. And that's not what the 7%, that is not factored into that 7% target. On top of that, you really have a challenge because you've got the eyes of the public, the needs of the public, which a lot of the time are focused on areas which require a lot of money. The schools, funding those and funding different programs throughout the state, and so that $252 million surplus, it's hard. It's hard for those legislators, I realize, to go ahead and make a decision that we need to go ahead and spend this money over here, because it just kind of, the sense is it's going to work out, like, so it's not my problem today. We'll kind of kick it down the road a little bit further until there's another day that somebody else can figure this out. But right now I've got constituents and I've got these things over here, and these are clearly more of a priority than the debt that we got to service.
And where a lot of that money goes is to the kind of more politically popular causes, right? So they, hire more police and firefighters and fund the school systems better. And, we're all advocates, I think, for all those things. And, Ben and I have had kids in the school system. Well, you could probably use a few cops over there, but I'm not sure anybody wants the job. But the challenge is how that kind of is a double-edged sword for when you consider in the pension system is that, police and firefighters, by the nature of what they do, they, number one, earn overtime, which affects their pension payouts down the road. And they have the opportunity to retire after 20 years of service. Now they've increased that to 25 years in, minimum age 52. But there's lots of police and firefighters on the books now receiving pensions. In fact, 93% of the pension recipients over $100,000 a year in the state, come from those jobs.
Yeah, and I don't think, from a standpoint of our appreciation for the service that these guys do goes unquestioned. We, love and appreciate each one of these people who put their life on the line every day. So this isn't the point of the conversation is not to bring that up, but to understand that we have a liability and, we've got to fund it and we've got to deal with it and we've got to address it and we've got to figure out how we're going to manage through this, because New Hampshire, I believe, is one of the top 10 most unfunded pensions in the country. Live free or die. I guess so. Living true right through the pension side of that piece. But, where we really need to focus is, if we're, like you said, 20 to 25 years, if it's 25 years, if it's XYZ, it's like we could actually hire probably more police officers, have less overtime, and have a better pension system and better protection. It's possible.
Yeah, when you look at it, as an average across the country and then, at the state level, each one of us, the portion of our personal income, this stat goes back to 2019, but, in the state of New Hampshire, almost 6% of our personal income is, would be directed to cover the unfunded liability here, right? So on top of the taxes we already pay in whatever municipality we live in, property taxes and all those things, which are essentially the only funding mechanism for this pension issue right now, that equates to about 6% of all of our earnings. So as I mentioned in the open, whether you're due to receive a pension from the state or not, we're all participants in this program. it is one way or the other. It's either costing us or we're paying or you'll be receiving it. But we're all involved.
Well, I think it's interesting too with the towns and what they have to put out too on top of our kind of local government requirements. So taking all of that plus what we're responsible for as a state, we'll talk about that next, I guess.
Folks, for listening to Money on Tap, you can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. We are talking about rolling the dice on your pension. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
On this Cliff Notes edition of Money on Tap, Ben and Dan discuss this recent headline.
It's like Airbnb, but for renting your pool to strangers. Things don't always go as planned. This is from Sarah Ashley O'Brien from CNN Business. So this article is really hilarious. So this guy, Chris, which they don't disclose his last name, was surprised when some woman pulled up to his house and asked if he could move his car because she believed she booked his pool for the night to rent. And it's called Swimply.
Yeah, some way to make money on the side during the pandemic or, as things are kind of getting tight with inflation. The whole notion of renting your pool, which I have an above-ground pool in the backyard, and I'd never thought of it, until this came up. And after reading this, I probably won't do it. But, yeah, it's a kind of an interesting idea, interesting model, a lot like Airbnb. The way it works is that the pool owner can set their own rate, whatever it is that they want to rent it out for. They can determine their own rules and hours and capacity and all those things. And it's a 15% cut that goes back to the company.
It was funny because there was other people that started pulling up after this lady, so I guess she was holding a real pool party.
Thanks for joining us for this Cliff Notes edition of Money on Tap, with great tips from the pros in three-dimensional investing, utilizing insurance, brokerage, and fee-based planning. We appreciate you listening to Money on Tap with Ben, Seth, and Dan. You can contact us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. And now, more of this week's program.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. Today, we're talking about rolling the dice on pensions. There is a lot more risk out there than people realize when taking a look at the pension world. And Ben, you were really kind of leaving off there with how state of New Hampshire's pension is one of the top 10 underfunded pensions. And there's kind of a lot of questions that, as the more that we talk about it, the more questions I have, like, well, why would they do that? Like, what was the reason behind that? And usually I'm just going to come back to, it was a money decision and it had to go one way or the other. And that was what decided years ago to get unfunded so that money could flow a different direction and, taxes would not have to be raised. But here we are today with, an unfunded pension and a target date out there. Was it 2039, I believe? Or, yeah. That this has to be paid off, and it's rolling up. The debt on this pension is rolling up at 6.75%, and that's compounding, right? We understand how debt works and compounding of debt, that snowball effect, and trying to take a look at some different ways that either you as a consumer can be aware of what's happening inside of your pension and around your pension world, or even as we like to be active or proactive around creating a pension. And I think that's one of the things that we'd love to try to, where we'd love to try to land the ship here with you folks is getting through some of this, is understanding you do not have to just you don't have to stand by and just watch other people make decisions for you around your future.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about here from a couple different levels. This is definitely a two-sided coin, right? So, as the, as representatives of the state, of voters of the state, we have, the towns are just getting hammered with this, and it's hitting property taxes. And then you have 18% of this unfunded liability is held by the state itself directly, which every taxpayer is also paying, we're going to be dealing with. So this is not a small deal. And then frustratingly, having a $252 million surplus in revenues this year and nothing going towards I'd really like to have a more sound financial scenario, because if we don't spend that $252 on the debt we do have, we're going to create new obligations, and in my pessimistic attitude of this, that's going to be spent on, and it might be a skateboard park. I'd much rather take care of our firefighters and our police officers and get that resolved, and the teachers of this great state that have sacrificed so much for all of us to have the lives we have. So that's really, really important, and I think we need to, as a state, address that and really get a handle on what that looks like. And there probably is a balance between the amount of time served and what the pension, they need to address that. If it's over ambitious, financially, then, well, that's a whole different story. I mean, that might be a conversation to be had, but not ours today. But the thing that, a lot of people don't realize, and I've had this happen with state of New Hampshire pensions, where I've actually worked with clients where we've actually looked at taking a buyout from the state of New Hampshire and actually rolling it into an annuity that created a pension for the person. And it was actually a higher income. So depending on the scenario and the time and so forth, you could actually find yourself in a couple different positions, one with more income, stronger financial guarantee from an insurance company that has a lot more leverage financially than the state of New Hampshire, and you might be able to actually create additional benefits and features too. So from a standpoint of, if you have a pension and you're unsure of the benefit and you have a buyout option, it's worth actually exploring the annuity world, because I've seen that some of the pension payouts, depending on years of service and all of that, can be better by an insurance company.
And when you think about the underlying investments, that these states have had to take on with that 60% exposure to the equity world, insurance companies don't do that. They are significantly more conservative with where that money goes. And then ultimately, as the consumer, if you end up buying an annuity with guarantees, you can take yourself from 60% exposure to the market to essentially zero.
Yeah.
And a lateral move and produce, the same or potentially even more income down the road. You're just taking so much risk off the table by considering something like that.
Well, separate from the market, you're talking about the state of New Hampshire. It's like, I know we got the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corp, and but that's not supposed to be guaranteed by the U.S. government. That's part of our old shows. Like, that's actually not. The government has put money into it, which was actually against the rules and regulations of the creation of the PBGC. But it's a scary thing to think that we have economic collapse in pensions coming our way, in my opinion. And I think that, and I don't say that to scare anybody. We have just so many baby boomers that are all going to be collecting on these pensions all at once. And guess what? Very, very few people are paying into pensions because there's just not that many offered.
Yeah, one of the interesting things around the numbers with the pensions was, and I think you mentioned this around the public service, like the police, firefighters, and in comparison to county officials and teachers, was the 20 years of service to really buy into or have a full retirement from the pension. And so there's an extension of the payouts with that when they're starting their pension early or retiring early. But then also there's the longevity that's happening in our world today. Just people are living longer all the time. It's not that uncommon to come across somebody that, either it's your grandmother or mother that is over the age of 100. That's more and more common now. And so the stress that is happening with, the duration of time that these pensions have to be paid out on, as well as the factor that, there's early retirement for a large chunk of the pensionees, that really expresses itself on the system.
Yeah, I think of it like this. I think of it like an ice cream truck pulling up to a neighborhood. This is going to sound kind of weird. And everyone runs out to get ice cream all at once. But then there's nobody else to buy ice cream because the ice cream truck drives away. The problem is that nobody's filling up the ice cream truck anymore for the next neighborhood. And so, but we have all these people retiring and a huge, huge demand on those pension systems all at once. Honestly, if you could get your pension, we talked about the 2014 Obama Pension Reform Act, Multi-Employer Pension Reform Act, many times on the show. The idea that you can actually change a current pension in payout to a lower number has happened in this country many times to a lot of people. And that's something that's scary. Now, it hasn't happened to the single employer pension side, but, just wait till that demand at the ice cream truck is so large and everyone's out of ice cream and you're the last person in line. That's the problem we're facing in this country, and we don't have enough people in China making ice cream for us. So, that's the overwhelming problem that we're facing. And if you can shift laterally, even laterally, or if it's even below lateral with additional benefits, like a spousal continuation that's higher, it might be a different type of lateral, like where you get joint income for life, but it's higher than the joint income at the state. If you can shift laterally in any capacity or better to an insurance company, you are in significantly better financial hands, as you provided. You can even get down to potentially zero risk in that insurance space with income for life and those type of things. So there's just so many things. So if you can get out of these things laterally, you can remove this risk. You might be able to diversify that pension risk among a few companies, even if you felt like you just didn't want it all in one hand.
And insurance companies, first of all, as an annuity holder, you're protected by contract law. Secondly, insurance companies, they have to run efficiently. They're for-profit businesses, and they understand that, right? So we understand that about them. They're not subject to kind of the political whims of what's the next administration coming in and what promises have they made and how does that defer money from the program to something that's...
And here's our unfunded liabilities.
Right, something easier to talk about, and let's see when they have to renew this debt, is it still at 6.75 or now they servicing the debt at 10, 11, 12%? I mean, what effect is that going to have? So there's just, and this is just my personal take on it, you can just assert a lot more control, a lot more predictability, and a lot less exposure to the equity world and the political world, by just kind of going private with your pension.
I totally agree with that.
You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. We were talking about rolling the dice on your pension, and we're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Listen to Money on Tap.
Call us today at 855-226-8551 and get your free consultation with Ben Brayshaw or Seth Krussman or any one of our partners and find out what's going on in your plan, your estate plan, your financial plan, or what you're planning at all, if nothing. Get it fixed, get it right, get it done today. Give us a call at 855-226-8551.
We appreciate you listening to Money on Tap with Ben, Seth, and Dan. You can contact us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. And now, more of this week's program.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. Hey, we want to also just thank you. If you have been sticking around for the show and you're first time with us, give us a call. We love to connect with our listeners, and we have something for you if you do that. Again, the number 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. And we're talking about rolling the dice on your pension. And the topic is one that we've had lots of pension conversations. We're retirement planners here at Brayshaw Financial Group. That's what we do. We have this podcast and radio show called Money on Tap. Really the goal for us is to just try to elevate the conversations that we're all having around finance and three-dimensional investing. That's what we do, taking a look at all sides. Pensions are a big part of that. And when we're taking a look at a big part of the financial landscape and so many people out there that are looking down the pipe and saying, I'm going to retire and my pension is going to cover a huge chunk of this for us. Well, you know what? The truth is that they're a very, very stressed system out there. And New Hampshire is one that we've been talking about. But folks, that's not it. I mean, it's all across the U.S. We can take a look at a map here and see Alaska at, pension debt of 16.3%. Right, unfunded pension liability there. There's so many more that we can just kind of start to rattle on here.
Yeah, in fact, there's it's clearly a national problem. There's only 2 states that are out of the 50 that don't have this issue ongoing. So the degree to which, and the measure here is percentage of personal income that would be required to settle the unfunded portion of the public debt. it's scary. I mean, New Jersey's at 20%. You just mentioned Alaska's about 16%. And most states are averaging seemingly right about where New Hampshire is, anywhere from 5 to 9%. So regardless of where you are in the country listening to this show, and regardless of not whether you have a pension with the state, when you think about it, what it means to you, it's like those national debt stats. We go through how much each of our portions of the national debt would be. But anywhere from 5 to 20% of your personal income, would be required for you to fork over just to get the state solvent on the pensions. I mean,
think about 20% of every person in New Jersey's income would need to be allocated to the pension.
Yeah, if they said we're going to wrap it up today, you literally have to fork over 20% of what you make, if you're not a participant.
That's not even federal.
That's more than your taxes, right?
So I mean, it's just astronomical to even process those numbers. I thought it was interesting, in the research here, 8 states had managed to decrease their unfunded pensions. So these are the states taking it a little bit more seriously. They're realizing they have a problem. Oklahoma was one, West Virginia, Rhode Island, Maine, Wisconsin, Indiana, South Dakota, and Tennessee. I thought that's clearly these states are hearing the message and they're addressing it. Saddened that New Hampshire's not in that mix for sure, but it is. It's a national problem, and so as a podcast, we're heard across the country. We've got 12 offices in 8 states, coast to coast. Where we've got clients all over the place. So New Hampshire is obviously where our headquarters is, and it's a big focus for us. But we know the problems that are out there, and for our listeners, understand that everything we've spoken about with New Hampshire is pretty much broken in every state.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of folks in Massachusetts, and then they're coming in at 7.9%, right? So, and this is just one way to measure that unfunded liability, and there's probably a million different ways to look at that. But the fact of the matter is this issue exists, and we're all paying for it in some form or fashion because these states have to service that debt.
And I think for our listeners, there's just so much concern about building a retirement. Retirement is all about building a foundation financially, and we talk to people about that all the time. The idea that you build enough financial resistance that you can cover your base, your core, your necessities, and people allocate their pension to that. And that's a very good, healthy thinking. I really applaud that thinking. Problem is if pensions didn't have such a scary, rocky road ahead of them, and then the uncertainty that you might be in the middle of your pension 10 or 15 years from now and all of a sudden get a letter in the mail like some people already have with that, the Obamacare bill, on that piece that, hey, your pension's now cut in half, because that's actually what's happened for people in this country. And you think about those things, and those are scary conversations. So it's another scary conversation is Social Security. Like, what does Social Security look like in 2034?
Literally where I was just about to go is, it's kind of an old school planning concept that we all grew up with, but the 3-legged stool, right?
Yeah.
So you get your Social Security, you get your pension, and then you get your personal investments. Well, 2 of those 3 legs are about to get a lot shorter. That's going to be a wobbly stool.
Yeah. And you don't know which one's going to wobble the most. So I think shoring up, it's easier to balance on 2 legs than 1.
Yeah.
So, so I think, shoring up that pension piece is really something that, and the other thing is folks, you've got an opportunity right now. The opportunity is that a lot of these pension companies want to dismantle some of this liability. They want to get rid of it. So they're offering buyouts. Why do you think they offer you those buyouts? They think that if they give you enough cash, they can get rid of the indefinite amount of income that you would be collecting. And if we can transfer that exact same risk and give you back the exact same opportunity, and you don't have to worry about any of this unfundedness, all this craziness, and go with an A-rated company, that kind of thing, like really have some strength behind it, it is worth it.
I mean, considering what these states, on average are paying to service this debt, right? They should be giving you a bonus to get out of the system. It would only be cheaper for them.
Right. And some of them theoretically are. And I think over time, I was actually talking to somebody one time many, many years ago who had a pension from a big tech company. And he said he didn't take the buyout at first. And then he got another buyout and didn't take it, kept collecting the pension, and then he finally got a thing where they were just terminating the pension. I can't remember exactly all the details. Or maybe it was the 3rd buyout. And he was telling me, he's like, you know what, every time I get this, I literally am like, why didn't I take the first one? And I remember that conversation with that person, and I was just, we were able to transition, get him a lifetime income, and it worked out really, really well for him. So it's not without opportunity. A lot of people think that they're kind of running into a hole, and the truth is the quicker you can run away from that hole and get some help, get some action, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, I think it's, when an opportunity presents itself to assert control, even if it ultimately is not the move for you to make, this conversation around whether you do or you don't, has to be had. And you need a professional to help you make that decision. And regardless of whether it works out, maybe staying in the pension is the right move for you. But just presuming it is and filing that in the circle file when you get that offer is you're really letting somebody else roll the dice with your pension.
And this is not about us. I mean, call anybody. I mean, if you don't want to give us a call, that's
sure.
Totally fine. But your advice is dead on, Dan. Like, what do you have to lose to find out if you can find an insurance company that can pay you a better pension in the state of New Hampshire? If you can get more money, which one would you choose? Right? So, I mean, if that's an option for you, which I've seen happen multiple times, you'd be foolish not to look at that.
Yeah. You guys, you've brought up so many interesting conversations, some books that I've read lately. Grant Cardone was part of our conversation earlier, and how he's looking at investing in real estate, at picking up assets because there's adjustable rate mortgages out there that are starting to turn over and the rates are going through the roof, and these investors are looking to get out. So he's looking to pick up those properties. And it's a billionaire mindset, folks. And it's an interesting perspective to have. And one of them that he talked about in his 10X rule book was a very similar story around a company that was downsizing by 50%. And they gave the employees an option of a significant buyout. All right. Or they could just wait and see what happens down the road. And if they were to be let go, then they would just get, a severance. Huge difference in money there. Huge difference. And the majority of the people took that, stick around, see what happens mentality. And then all they got was a severance if they weren't, held on to. And that's a lesson for us to just take a look at that. How do we process? How do we think? What are the opportunities? And if you have a pension out there, like Ben was talking about, take a look at the numbers, get curious, ask the questions, bring it in and see what your options are. None of those things are going to hurt you to try to understand better. They're only going to help you. You don't know what's available until you start to ask the questions and start to look. And anyways, that was my biggest takeaway. How about you?
Yeah, I think that's, my takeaways from this whole, process of getting prepared for the show and the conversation we're having today is that, number one, pensions are vastly underfunded in significant ways. Number two, they're investing in ways that are potentially riskier than you would invest should you have that option. And the third thing is, consider options. Don't presume it's always going to be there. Take a little time, make the best decision for your future and your retirement, but you can't do that without taking a look at what options exist around you.
I would concur with all of those. I would only add that, from an investment standpoint, we're staring, down the gun of a recession, and, you might be down 7.9 or 8.9% in your pension returns this year, but, we could be looking at a 10 or 15 or 20% loss. So, locking in those things, your buyouts might just be a lot lower, post that scenario. So if you do have a buyout now and there is an option there, that's something I would kind of race to the marketplace and see what's out there for yourself. The second thing is that some of these pension programs that you get buyouts, you can actually create income that when you're going to retire will actually be higher than what the projection is. So there's a kind of a deferral credit in a lot of these programs. So, the sooner you do something, the more bandwidth you potentially have in actually creating more value for you and your family.
You might not have to wait, just to add, to that, decision point. You don't have to wait to retirement to do it.
Yeah.
Call your pension benefits people today and see if that option exists pre-retirement. Because the longer you get to set that money aside on the insurance world, the bigger the pay it'll ultimately be. So it may be an opportunity to get into this program before you've actually severed employment.
Folks, that's going to do it for us in Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. It has been a lot of fun talking about rolling the dice on pensions here today. And you know what? Getting into the solutions. That's what we do as planners at Brayshaw Financial Group. We love the opportunity to work with you. Thank you so much for sticking around and listening today. Make it a great week.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of this radio station and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. No strategy, product, material, or tool mentioned can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information, products, materials, or tools mentioned should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. This show may be subsidized in whole or in part by a product sponsor or issuer. Securities and advisory services offered through SagePoint Financial Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC, and a registered investment advisor. All other services offered through Brayshaw Financial Group LLC are independent of SagePoint Financial. SagePoint Financial and Brayshaw Financial Group do not provide tax or legal advice. Main office is located at 116 South River Road, Bedford, New Hampshire, 03110, and can be reached at toll-free 855-226-8551.
Well, bye.